Hello everyone, thanks for joining me today on Facebook Live and YouTube. I'm meteorologist Johanna Wagstaffe to talk about the science around the latest round of historic wildfires in California. So if you have any questions about the science of what's happening in California with the fires, send me a comment and I'll try and answer your questions over the next little bit. So again, I just want to give you a bit of a recap about where we're at today with the California wildfires. This latest round started early last week, fueled by very strong winds. We saw several wildfires break out in Southern California. Firefighters were able to gain the upper hand on the fires closest to San Diego and LA over the weekend. But the Thomas fire burning near the Santa Barbara County is still almost 0% contained. I want to show you a map right now of where the fires, the biggest fire that we're watching is. So LA is down here. This is the Thomas fire. It's now the 5th largest fire in California's history. It's about the size of Boston and New York combined. This is the one that firefighters are having a hard time containing because of several different factors. Winds are still a big concern, and I just want to show you my weather graphics over here that takes in the latest weather warnings. These are red flag warnings. You can see San Francisco up here, LA down here. Red flag warnings are when we have extreme fire danger, and these have been in place for now a week. Winds are not as strong as where they were when these fires first began. That's when we were seeing gusts to 120, 130 kilometers per hour. Those are the gusts that ended up knocking over power lines, sparking these new fires, fanning existing fires. We're still seeing gusts today, though, up to 60 kilometers per hour. And this area where the Thomas fire is burning is incredibly steep terrain. That's not only making it difficult for firefighters to get heavy equipment on the ground, but it's creating microclimates, which makes this fire very difficult to fight. I want to show you a video that the Public Information Office of Ventura County tweeted just a few minutes ago. This is a time lapse of the Thomas fire, and you can see this building plume. It almost looks like a thunderstorm cloud, and that's almost exactly what's happening. This fire is so hot and so powerful, it's creating what's known as a pyrocumulus cloud. So this is, let's loop it again. This is actually creating its own weather conditions. Again, we're getting updrafts and downdrafts that are making it very difficult for firefighters to, again, gain the upper hand. The other new factor in the past 24 hours has been air quality. We're seeing a slight shift in winds. They've been generally coming from the east to the west over the past week. And now we're getting a bit of an onshore flow just in the past 24 hours. And that's pushing smoke inland, creating very poor air quality. So again, if you're just joining me, I'm meteorologist Johanna Wagstaffe talking about the science surrounding the wildfires in California. And if you have any questions, send me a tweet. I want to take you back over to this graphic. I wanted to show you the relative humidity right now, because winds aren't the only factor. As I mentioned, most of the winds are coming from inland towards the ocean. In the past day, we've been getting some weakening of the winds, which has allowed smoke and poor air quality to move inland. Look at these air quality indexes, though. Relative humidity, I should say, is less than 10% along the coastal areas. And anytime we have relative humidity values less than 30%, that's a big concern for fire danger. Just that amount of dry air means that the fires can develop very rapidly. Getting a question from Len Fiddler. Is this a direct result of global warming? I'm glad somebody asked this question right away. These wildfires are not a direct result of global warming. We have always had wildfires. Forest fires are a natural part of the cycle in any forest around the world. But this situation has been amplified by climate change for a couple of reasons. First of all, it was one of the wettest winters on record for California. That has led to a lot of new growth of brush in the surrounding hills where these fires are burning. And then we had the driest summer ever on record for California. That dried out all of that brush, made that tinder basically available to burn. So that's one of the reasons why climate change is a factor. These extreme in seasons we're seeing more and more often. Santa Ana winds is a factor we always get. These winds that race from the deserts towards the coastline. We've always seen those winds. That's not a result of climate change. But these winds are stronger and lasting longer than we've ever seen before, amplified by climate change. And the other factor is we're not seeing any rain in the forecast for weeks. No rain right through to the end of December because of this big blocking pattern that actually extends all the way from Western Canada down to California. And we're seeing these blocking patterns more and more frequently because of climate change. So this is not a direct result of climate change, but we're seeing these factors amplified because of it. Another question, Joao Dinez asks, is there any chance the fire can spread over to neighboring states? Also good question, and it goes back to the winds. I want to take you over to look at the snapshot of the winds right now in California. This is one of the tools I look to see generally where the winds are going. Here's the west coast of the U.S. Here's California. Generally, the winds are moving inland towards the coast, so they're going east to west, in part because we have this big high pressure system sitting over the desert plains. We get this clockwise spin that pushes the air out towards the ocean. That's what's been creating these very hot and very dry and very strong winds, but it is pushing everything east to west. So the chances of the fires pressing eastward at this point are very low because generally the winds are directing where the spread of fires are going. Now, that being said, when we get fires as big as the Thomas fire burning, that's when we can see erratic wind conditions. Sparks and flames can fly kilometers in either direction. So it's not out of the question we could see these fires push inland, but not likely that we'll see these fires spread eastward. A YouTube viewer is asking, are firefighters able to put out the fire? Also a great question. And when we see fires this big, I'll just loop that video again of this plume of the Thomas fire where it's creating its own fire weather conditions right now. When we see fires this big, firefighters can't just put the fire out with flame retardant or water. What they're trying to do right now is control the perimeter of the fire so that it can burn itself out. They basically want to stop the fire from spreading so that once it runs out of fuels, it will go out on its own. That's basically what firefighters are targeting right now. Over 4,000 of them are fighting. The problem when you're dealing with the really steep terrain in this area of Southern California, you can't get the heavy equipment on the ground to dig the trenches that you need to around the fire to stop it from burning these fuels. And it's these fuels on the ground that are causing so much problem. So much of the brush that grew after such a wet winter has now dried out, and that is just a tinder dry. So firefighters are trying to stop the perimeter. They're not able to put it out directly. These are great questions. Just to recap, watching the California wildfire situation closely, it's the Thomas fire that's burning to the northwest of Los Angeles that is the greatest concern today. Thousands have been evacuated from their homes. This fire is threatening a lot of wealthy homes as well, a lot of celebrities being evacuated from their homes. And air quality, a big concern today because we have seen the winds let up slightly. That's allowed the smoke to push inland. And that's not only creating poor air quality conditions, it's making it very difficult for firefighters to battle fire because from above they have poor visibility when they're trying to target the perimeter of those fires. Great questions coming in. Derek Streets asks, do you think this is the new normal as the governor has stated? Great question. Governor Jerry Brown on Sunday, I think, said that the wildfires that we're seeing now burning what will likely be well into Christmas is what will be the new normal as we head into a warming climate. And unfortunately, I do think this is a new normal. Climate change is having a huge impact on our fire seasons. Our seasons, not just in California, but all the way up to British Columbia and parts of Canada. Our fire season is getting longer because our seasons are getting hotter and drier. We're seeing these blocking patterns happen more frequently where we're seeing days on end of dry weather and no precipitation in the forecast. And we're seeing these extreme wind events happen more frequently that are fanning these fires. Climate change isn't the only factor though. With the buildup of cities and the buildup of cities pushing into what has normally been fire zones, it's these interface fires that we're having a hard time building regulations around. Los Angeles has very strict regulations when it comes to cleaning the brush around your home, but now there are questions, of course, about whether that has done enough. We're still seeing over 680 homes burnt with this latest fire alone. So as far as this being a new normal, I do think that our fire seasons are going to last longer and they're going to be more dangerous. One point that a lot of meteorologists have brought up in the past couple of months with all of these wildfires, especially in California, is whether or not, because we can forecast these wind events, whether or not we need to be shutting down the power grids. Because in California, these winds knocking down power lines is what is starting a lot of these new fires. And since we're able to forecast these wind events with these new normals of hot and dry and windy conditions, maybe we need to be shutting off the power before these large wind events. That's one of the conversations I've seen arise amongst meteorologists with this latest round of fires. So again, if you're just joining us from Facebook Live or YouTube, I'm meteorologist Johanna Wagstaffe, and we're talking the science around wildfires. A lot of different angles here. The Santa Ana winds, the fact that it's been such a wet winter followed by a dry summer, the idea that climate change is exacerbating these issues, and the fact that the terrain is so difficult right now for the Thomas fire that it's been very difficult to fight for firefighters. A question from Sylvester Law: why is the forest fire happening in December and not in the heat of summer? Yeah, if typically you think of forest fire being in our summer months, and in Canada, our fire seasons generally run from spring to fall when we do get these hot and dry conditions. We can, though, in Canada, see wildfires burn straight through the winter months. Some of them even go underground. California is slightly different because of the Santa Ana winds, and I want to show you a graphic that I made to sort of explain the case here. If you're watching from Alberta, you know these as the Chinook winds. Anytime you get hot and dry winds moving down in elevation, they can create dangerous fire conditions. So in the U.S., in the fall and in the winter is when we get these big high pressure systems building over the Great Plains deserts. So what that sinking air does is force those winds from the east to the west. And as they race through the mountain valleys, through those steep terrains, down in elevation, they get compressed. So they dry out and they heat up. And as they race through those valleys and canyons, they actually speed up. So this is where we can see hurricane force winds that are very hot and very dry racing through these valleys. And that's what ends up creating these incredibly critical fire danger conditions. These Santa Ana winds are the worst for California in the fall and the winter. So California does have a fall fire season. It's not out of the norm to see fires burning this late in the season. This has been an exceptional Santa Ana setup. These winds have lasted way longer than they usually do, way stronger than they usually do. And again, all of these added factors from what has been such an incredible year has made this December fire season one of the worst on records ever. So it's not unusual to see fires burn in December in California, but this has been exceptional. Jan Cloud asks, with the ocean water close by, why is the fire still burning? Yeah, a valid thought, given that all of these fires are coastal. This is a look again at the fire danger happening right now in Los Angeles area. Ventura County is where the Thomas fire is happening. Because most of the winds are blowing east to west, it's a dry wind. And although firefighters have access to the ocean water to put these fires out, these fires are too big and too hot to just be put out by water. In fact, the air is so hot and dry that when firefighters are dumping the water and the fire retardant on the fires, a lot of it is evaporating before it can even get to the wildfires. Not only are the fires incredibly hot right now, but the air is so dry. Relative humidity, as I mentioned earlier, is less than 10%. So less than 10% of the air has moisture in it, 4% in Oxnard, which is the closest weather station to that Thomas fire. So when the water is being dropped, it's just evaporating. I mentioned earlier the Thomas fire creating its own weather conditions, its own updrafts and downdrafts. That's also making it difficult for firefighters to drop water on these fires, which is why fighters are right now targeting the perimeters of these fires, trying to stop it, digging trenches to stop the fires from jumping and continuing to grow to all of that fresh tinder that is nearby, ready to burn. So yeah, you'd think because they're burning on the coast, firefighters would have access to the water, but these fires are just too big and too hot to have any impact. Just want to show you a couple of other things that I'm watching over here. Again, taking you back to the fire perimeter. This is the latest perimeter of the fire. You can see in red, this is the Thomas fire that is about the size of Boston and New York City combined. So firefighters are working on these outskirts to try and block this fire in. The problem is you can see the terrain here in the mountainous areas is so steep you can't actually get the equipment, the backhoes that they need to dig these trenches to stop these fires from expanding. And this is where we saw an incredible growth of brush and vegetation after such a wet winter, and now that has all dried out after one of the driest summers, falls, and heading into winters that they've ever seen on record. Question from Peggy Woolsey: where is all the water coming from to fight the fires? I'm not sure of the exact tactics that the firefighters are using in this area. There's about 4,000 of them fighting. I know they're using a lot of ocean water and fire retardant, but at this point, when these fires get this large, water is not their main tool. It's again trying to create a perimeter, actually digging trenches in the forest, clearing that brush out ahead of the fire, so when it burns to that block that they've made, the fire doesn't have anything to burn through. So firefighters are working very hard ahead of the fire to try and create a natural wall and get all of that tinder out of the way. I want to show you something else that I thought was kind of interesting. So this is the Thomas fire. These are taken from NASA satellite images. Just in the past week, this Thomas fire has exploded in size. So take a look at this time lapse. I'm just going to let it run for you a couple of times. You can see these fires expanding west and south as these winds are pushing it towards that westward direction. So the fire started on December 4th. And you can see how quickly it's spread just in the past week. And you can also notice this plume indicating which direction the winds are blowing, again, from the deserts towards the coast. So that's the way that the fire is generally being progressing. We've seen winds ease slightly in the past couple of days. We're still getting gusts to 60 kilometers per hour at this hour in through the Thomas fire. Question from Tim Hamilton: is Canada sending any support to California? I'm actually not sure on that. It's a great question. I'll see if we can get a link to the latest information as far as the firefighters. I know there are about 4,000 firefighters working on the fire. I'm not sure if we've sent any support down, but I'll try and get some information from you. In the past, Canada has sent firefighters down, especially in the early fall wildfires, because these December fires aren't the only historic ones we've had this season. It was earlier this very fall that California saw, I think it was almost 8,000 structures burnt because of wildfires after an incredibly dry winter. So we'll see if we can get information on where those firefighters are coming from. Things that I'm watching over the next couple of days: dry conditions are going to stick around through to the end of the month. This big high pressure system that's not allowing any Pacific air or Pacific system to come in and bring good soaking rain that would actually put these fires out, that's not going to happen. This big high pressure system actually extends right across British Columbia. If you're watching from British Columbia, you know we've been in a very dry stretch. If you're watching from Alberta, parts of Saskatchewan, all under that same high pressure ridge, which is also funneling those winds down to California. I remember before this high pressure system built, meteorologists right across the western North America coastline were watching this high pressure ridge, looking at it and knowing that it was going to be incredibly resilient and knowing that it was going to last for weeks on end. It's not out of the question that we see high pressure systems last this long, but this one is exceptionally strong. And this is something that new research is looking at when connecting climate change to wildfires, these blocking patterns that end up meeting days on end of hot and dry weather. Tying into this, a question from Prachi Kalra: is this related to the excessive fog in Canada? So if you're watching from parts of southern British Columbia, we've had a very foggy stretch of weather over the past week. And yes, it is connected to the same conditions leading to the excessive fire weather in the States. I want to take you back over to one of my satellite shots. This is the latest look at the satellite over Western Canada. This big high pressure system is basically sitting over the Great Basin, but it extends all the way up into BC. And it's been acting like a dome, protecting BC and Washington and Oregon and California from any system moving in. You can see it's actually spinning weather up and around, keeping things very dry. It's sinking air as well around a high pressure system. That's why we don't get any clouds usually, because it's sinking. What's been happening in British Columbia is that sinking air has actually blocked in fog and moisture in the low levels. We're in what's called an inversion. So we get this fog down below, but just a few hundred meters above it, it's very warm and very dry. So yeah, the fog that we're seeing in BC, absolutely connected to the dry weather happening in California. We're actually going to see a breakdown of our ridge in British Columbia as we head into the weekend. The ridge, though, in California is holding strong. I've been looking at some of the long-range models. No rain in Southern California expected through to the end of December, which will have been close to 4 weeks at that point. 4 weeks of no rain in December, which can be one of California's wetter seasons. Now, at the end of the week, it does look like we might get winds shifting in California, so you might get more of a marine flow. That doesn't mean rain, but it means relative humidity levels might start to ramp up. That might help firefighters, but it looks like they're going to be battling these fires well into 2018, well into the month of January for California. Rose Mudge asks, where can people go to be safe from the fire? So if you are watching from California, if you do have friends or family in California, fire officials have been giving the latest information, actually getting automatic tweets. It was a bit of an unprecedented situation late last week when the big Santa Ana wind event was happening, and meteorologists saw these winds were going to be blowing to hurricane force strength. Winds have been a huge issue in knocking over power lines and starting new fires and fanning existing fires. So millions of people actually got a text late last week, all at the same time, telling them that fire conditions are going to be critical that night because of winds and to pay attention. So the only thing you can do in these situations is to follow the evacuation orders, because these winds and the fires are changing so erratically. Again, right now it does look like firefighters have gained the upper hand on the fires burning closest to Los Angeles and San Diego. The Thomas fire, though, in the Santa Barbara area, definitely still critical fire danger. So if you're watching or just joining us from Facebook Live or YouTube, I'm meteorologist Johanna Wagstaffe, and we're talking about the science around the wildfires in California. It has been an unprecedented season for wildfires, not just in California, but in British Columbia. In part, we've been sharing some of the same weather conditions, a lot of other factors, not just climate change and not just weather, that go into why this has been such an historic situation for California, but weather certainly what firefighters are watching closely. If you've got any more questions, I think I can take a couple more, but just to sort of wrap things up, the Thomas fire is the one that firefighters are watching most closely right now. Winds are still gusting to 60 kilometers per hour tonight. Terrain is difficult. Vegetation is incredibly dry and incredibly abundant for this time of the year. Firefighters are trying to create that perimeter around the fire. It's too hot for water and fire retardant to really make a big difference when you get the fires this big. No rain in the forecast for the next couple of weeks. I imagine, unfortunately, this is a story we're going to be talking about for quite some time. Thank you again for all of your questions. I think I have to get back to you on a couple of answers, but thanks for joining us, and I'll let you know if conditions change dramatically over the next couple of days. Thanks again.